She shared her lunch with a homeless stranger. Hours later, he became her worst nightmare. Kira Brooks was sharing her lunch with a homeless veteran named Walter when he dropped the bombshell that destroyed her world. I helped build Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I spent 30 years creating the opioid crisis. Hours later, at her fiancé's family dinner, Kira walked into a billionaire's mansion and came face to face with Walter again. Except now he was clean-shaven, wearing a $1,000 suit, and sitting at the head of the table as William Harrison, CEO of the company that killed thousands with addictive painkillers. The homeless man who'd confessed his crimes over turkey sandwiches was about to become her father-in-law. What Kira didn't know was that William had been living on the streets for 6 months as penance for his son's overdose death, a son who died from his own company's drugs. Now she had to choose: expose the billionaire's secret double life and destroy her fiancé's family, or accept $50 million in blood money to fund the addiction recovery program she'd spent her career fighting for. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The autumn wind whipped through downtown Chicago as Kira Brooks hurried out of the courthouse, clutching a stack of case files against her chest. Another day, another family torn apart by the foster care system she was trying desperately to reform from the inside. As a social worker specializing in child welfare, she'd seen enough broken homes to last several lifetimes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her fiancé. "Dinner at 7. Finally ready for you to meet the family. Nervous but excited. Love you." Kira smiled despite her exhaustion. After 8 months of dating and 3 months of engagement, she was finally going to meet Garrett's parents. He'd been so secretive about them, always saying they were simple people from Ohio who were kind of old-fashioned, and needed time to warm up to the idea of their son marrying outside his race. She checked her watch. 4:30 p.m. Just enough time to grab lunch and review her notes for tomorrow's hearing about the Peterson children, 3 siblings who'd been bounced between homes for 2 years. That's when she saw him. An older white man sat hunched on the courthouse steps, wearing a torn military jacket that had seen better decades. His gray hair was unkempt, his beard patchy, and his weathered hands shook slightly as he held a cardboard sign. "Homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless." Most people walked past him without a glance, but something about his posture made Kira pause. He wasn't aggressive or demanding like some of the panhandlers downtown. He just sat quietly, almost invisible, like he was apologizing for existing. Kira's heart clenched. She'd worked with enough veterans in the system to know how easily they could fall through the cracks. "Excuse me," she said gently, approaching the man. "Have you eaten today?" He looked up with startling blue eyes that seemed too bright for his weathered face. "Ma'am, I was about to grab lunch. Would you like to join me? There's a sandwich shop across the street." The man stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You want to buy me lunch?" "I want to share lunch with you." "There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe even gratitude. "I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all. I'm Kira, by the way." "Walter," he said quietly, struggling to his feet. "Walter Johnson." 20 minutes later, they sat in a small deli, Walter carefully eating a turkey sandwich while Kira picked at her salad. She'd noticed how he held the food, like it was precious, taking small bites to make it last. "You don't have to tell me your story," Kira said gently, "but I'm a good listener if you want to talk." Walter was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "Lost my son 2 years ago. Overdose. After that, everything just fell apart." Kira's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a good kid. Smart, funny, had his whole life ahead of him." Walter's voice cracked slightly. "Got hurt in a construction accident. Doctor prescribed pain pills. Next thing we knew, he was addicted to heroin." That's happening to so many families. The opioid crisis has destroyed entire communities. "Yeah, well, some of us are more responsible for that crisis than others." Walter's tone turned bitter. "I spent 30 years building something I thought would help people. Turns out I was just making it easier for kids like my son to die." Kira frowned. What do you mean? Walter looked at her carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. I used to work in pharmaceuticals. Management level. We knew the pills were addictive, but we kept pushing them anyway. Profits over people, you know. That must be an incredible burden to carry. It is. Especially when your own son becomes a casualty of your industry. Walter's hands trembled as he set down his coffee cup. I tried to make amends after he died. Donated money, funded treatment programs. But it never felt like enough. Is that why you're... Kira gestured gently toward his appearance. Why I'm living on the streets. Yeah. Seemed like the least I could do was experience what I'd put so many families through. See what it's like when you lose everything. Kira studied his face, seeing intelligence and deep pain behind the homeless exterior. How long have you been living this way? 6 months. Long enough to understand that I spent most of my life in a bubble, completely disconnected from the real world. And your family? Do they know where you are? Walter's expression darkened. My family thinks I'm on an extended business trip in Europe. They don't know about this. He gestured to his ragged clothes. They wouldn't understand. Maybe they'd understand more than you think. No, Walter said firmly. They're still living in that bubble I created. Still benefiting from blood money while pretending their hands are clean. Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. Walter, what company did you work for? He was quiet for a long moment, then met her eyes. Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Maybe you've heard of it. Kira's blood turned to ice. Meridian Pharmaceuticals was one of the companies at the center of the opioid crisis, responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths across the country. She'd seen their drugs tear apart dozens of families in her caseload. You worked for Meridian? She asked carefully. I didn't just work for them, Walter said quietly. I helped build them into what they became. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Have you ever met someone whose past decisions haunted them so deeply they changed their entire life? How did their story affect you? Let me know in the comments. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Walter's confession settling between them. Finally, Kira reached across the table and touched his weathered hand. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. And thank you for trying to make amends, even if it feels impossible. Most people would run away after hearing what I just told you. I'm not most people. I work with families destroyed by addiction every day. I know the pain is real on all sides. Walter's eyes filled with tears. I haven't had a real conversation with someone in months. People look right through you when you're homeless. Well, I see you. And I think what you're doing, trying to understand the consequences of your actions, that takes courage. Or stupidity. Maybe both. But at least you're facing the truth instead of hiding from it. Walter finished his sandwich and looked at his watch, an expensive piece that seemed oddly out of place with his homeless appearance. I should let you get back to your day, he said. You've been incredibly kind, but I'm sure you have important things to do. Actually, I have a dinner tonight that I'm nervous about. Meeting my fiancé's family for the first time. That's a big step. Are you worried they won't like you? Something like that. Garrett says they're old-fashioned, and I get the feeling they have some preconceived notions about who their son should marry. Walter's expression grew thoughtful. What's your fiancé like? Does he treat you well? He's wonderful. Honest, kind, supportive. Sometimes I think he's too good to be true. Kira smiled. He works in finance, comes from a middle-class family in Ohio. Very different from my world, but he understands my work and respects what I do. That's what matters. Not what his family thinks. I know. I just want them to see that I love him for who he is, not what he can provide. Walter nodded slowly. Sometimes families can surprise you. Maybe they'll be more accepting than you expect. They parted ways outside the deli, Walter refusing Kira's offer of money but accepting her business card. If you ever need help finding resources, housing assistance, job programs, anything, please call me, she said. Thank you, Kira. You've given me more than lunch today. You've reminded me that there are still good people in the world. As Kira walked back to her office, she couldn't stop thinking about Walter's story. A man so consumed by guilt over his role in the opioid crisis that he'd chosen to live as a homeless veteran, experiencing firsthand the suffering his company had caused. She wondered what it would take for more executives to face the consequences of their actions so directly. 6 hours later, Kira stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the necklace Garrett had given her for their 6-month anniversary. She'd chosen a simple but elegant dress, professional enough to show she was serious, but not so formal that it seemed like she was trying too hard. Her phone buzzed with another text from Garrett. "Car's here. Ready to meet the most important people in my life." Kira took a deep breath and grabbed her purse. Time to find out if Garrett's family was as accepting as he hoped they'd be. The car ride took them out of the city and into one of Chicago's most exclusive suburbs. Kira watched the houses grow larger and more elaborate as they drove, her nervousness increasing with each mile. "Garrett," she said carefully, "when you said your family was middle class." I know. Dad's done well for himself over the years. But they're still the same people who raised me to work hard and treat everyone with respect." The car turned into a gated driveway that led to a sprawling estate overlooking Lake Michigan. Kira's mouth fell open. "This is your parents' house?" "I wanted to ease you into it gradually," Garrett said sheepishly. "I didn't want you to think I was some spoiled rich kid. Garrett, this isn't doing well. This is billionaire money. My dad's company was very successful. But Kira, I swear, they're good people. They just happen to have money." As they pulled up to the circular driveway, Kira saw a mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. Manicured gardens, a fountain, valet parking. This was a world she'd only seen in movies. "What exactly does your father do?" she asked as they got out of the car. "Pharmaceuticals. He built Meridian from the ground up." Kira's world tilted sideways. "Did you just say Meridian Pharmaceuticals?" "Yeah, why? Do you know it?" Before Kira could answer, the front door opened and a woman in an elegant cocktail dress walked out to greet them. "Darling," she called to Garrett, "we've been so excited to meet your fiancé." As they walked toward the house, Kira's mind raced. Garrett's family owned Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the same company that Walter had helped build, the same company responsible for the opioid crisis that had destroyed so many families, the same company that had killed Walter's son. "Mom," Garrett said as they reached the door. "This is Kira. Kira, this is my mother, Patricia." "Welcome to our home, dear," Patricia said warmly, though Kira caught her eyes doing a quick assessment. "Garrett has told us so much about you." They walked through a foyer that was bigger than Kira's entire apartment, past artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year. "Your father is in the study," Patricia said to Garrett. "He's been looking forward to this all week." As they approached a set of heavy wooden doors, Kira tried to prepare herself for meeting the head of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the man whose company had caused so much suffering, the man whose wealth was built on addiction and death. "Dad!" Garrett knocked and pushed open the door. "We're here." The study was lined with leather-bound books and expensive whiskey, exactly what Kira had expected from a pharmaceutical billionaire. Behind a massive desk sat a distinguished man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive suit and a confident smile. But it wasn't the billionaire CEO she'd been expecting. It was Walter. Clean-shaven, perfectly groomed, wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but definitely Walter. The homeless veteran who'd shared his story of guilt and redemption over turkey sandwiches just hours earlier. Their eyes met across the room, and Kira saw the exact moment when Walter realized who she was. His confident smile faltered, replaced by something that looked like panic. "Kira," Garrett said proudly, "I'd like you to meet my father, William Harrison." "Dad, this is my fiancée, Kira Brooks." William Harrison. Not Walter Johnson. The homeless veteran who'd been living on the streets for 6 months was actually the billionaire CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals. And he was about to become her father-in-law. What would you do if you discovered someone you'd shown kindness to had been lying about their entire identity? Would you feel betrayed or understanding? Share your thoughts below. It's very nice to meet you, Mr. Harrison, Kira managed, her voice sounding strange even to her own ears. William stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. The pleasure is all mine, Ms. Brooks. Garrett has told us wonderful things about your work in social services. The formal tone, the expensive clothes, the powerful demeanor. This was a completely different person from the broken man she'd had lunch with. But his eyes were the same. Those startling blue eyes that had seemed too bright for his weathered face. Dad's been traveling for business lately, Garrett said, settling into a chair beside Kira. He just got back from Europe yesterday. Europe, Kira repeated, remembering Walter's words about his family, thinking he was on an extended business trip. 6 months in Geneva, William said smoothly. Pharmaceutical conference and some research projects. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Kira wondered how many other lies he'd told over the years. To his family, to his investors, to the families whose lives his company had destroyed. Kira works with foster children, Garrett said proudly. She's trying to reform the system from the inside. How admirable, William said, but Kira caught something in his tone. Guilt. Recognition. That must be difficult work. It is. Especially when you see families torn apart by addiction. The opioid crisis has been devastating to the communities I work with. The words hung in the air like a challenge. William's face remained impassive, but Kira saw his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. Yes, he said carefully. Addiction is a terrible tragedy. So many innocent victims. Innocent victims and guilty corporations, Kira said quietly. Garrett looked at her in surprise. Kira, what's gotten into you? But William understood exactly what she was doing. This was the same conversation they'd had over lunch, except now they both knew who the other really was. You're absolutely right, William said slowly. Some corporations have a lot to answer for. Dad's company has actually been working on addiction treatment programs, Garrett said, trying to ease the tension he could feel building in the room. Haven't you, Dad? We've made some investments in that area, yes. Patricia appeared in the doorway. Dinner is ready, everyone. Shall we go to the dining room? As they walked through the mansion toward the formal dining room, Kira's mind reeled with questions. How long had William been living this double life? Did his family have any idea what he'd been doing for the past 6 months? And what was she supposed to do with this information? The dining room was everything she'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork, a table that could seat 20 people. William took his place at the head of the table, looking every inch the successful businessman. But Kira could still see Walter in his eyes. The broken father who'd lost his son to addiction. The man consumed by guilt over his role in a crisis that had destroyed millions of lives. So Kira, Patricia said as the first course was served, tell us about your family. Where are you from originally? I grew up on the South Side, Kira said, trying to focus on the conversation despite her spinning thoughts. My mother was a nurse. My father worked construction. They both passed when I was in college. I'm so sorry for your loss, William said quietly, and for a moment, his voice carried the same gentle tone she'd heard from Walter that afternoon. Thank you. They taught me the importance of giving back to the community. That's why I went into social work. And how did you and Garrett meet? Patricia asked. At a charity fundraiser for foster children, Garrett said, smiling at the memory. Kira was giving a presentation about the need for reform in the system. She was so passionate, so articulate. I knew I had to meet her. It sounds like you two are very well matched, William said, but his eyes never left Kira's face. As dinner progressed, Kira found herself studying William's every move, looking for signs of the homeless veteran she'd met that afternoon. The way he held his fork, the careful way he spoke, the expensive watch on his wrist. It was the same watch Walter had been wearing, she realized. How had she missed it? How had she not recognized one of the most powerful men in Chicago? Because William, had been playing a role. Just like he was playing a role now, sitting at the head of his family's dinner table, pretending to be the successful businessman who'd never spent a night sleeping rough on the streets of Chicago. The question was, which version was real? And what was she going to do about either of them? The dinner continued with polite conversation about Garrett's work, Kira's career, and wedding plans, but underneath the surface, an electric tension crackled between Kira and William. Every time their eyes met across the crystal and china, Kira saw flashes of Walter, the broken man who'd confessed his sins over a turkey sandwich. "Kira, dear," Patricia said as dessert was served, "Garrett mentioned you work specifically with families affected by substance abuse. That must be heartbreaking work." "It is," Kira replied, her gaze fixed on William. "But what's most heartbreaking is seeing how corporate greed has fueled this crisis. Companies that knew their products were addictive but pushed them anyway for profit." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's documented fact. Internal memos, whistleblower testimony, court records. The evidence is overwhelming." Garrett shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maybe we should talk about something lighter?" "No," William said quietly, setting down his fork. "I think this is an important conversation. Ms. Brooks, what would you say to someone who worked for one of those companies? Someone who didn't fully understand the consequences of their actions at the time?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Patricia and Garrett looked confused by the sudden intensity, but Kira understood exactly what William was asking. "I'd say that ignorance stops being an excuse when the evidence becomes undeniable. At some point, you have to choose between profits and people. And if someone chose profits, what then? Then they have blood on their hands. And they need to find a way to live with that." William nodded slowly. "And what about redemption? Is it possible for someone to make amends for that kind of mistake?" "I don't know," Kira said honestly. "How do you make amends for thousands of deaths? How do you apologize to families whose children died from addiction to drugs you helped push?" "Dad," Garrett interrupted, looking bewildered. "Why are we talking about this? Your company makes heart medication and diabetes drugs." William and Kira locked eyes across the table. The moment of truth had arrived. "Actually, son," William said slowly, "Meridian Pharmaceuticals was one of the largest producers of OxyContin and other opioid painkillers. We are, one of the companies Ms. Brooks is talking about." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went pale, and Garrett looked like he'd been slapped. "What?" Garrett whispered. "Dad, that's not. We talked about this. You said Meridian was different, that you only made drugs that helped people." "I lied," William said simply. "To you, to your mother, to myself. 4 years. How many people died because of your drugs?" Kira asked quietly. "Conservative estimates put it at around 40,000 directly, maybe twice that when you factor in people who moved from prescription pills to street drugs." William's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "Including my own son." Patricia gasped. "William, what are you talking about? We don't have another son." "We had another son." William's mask finally cracked completely. "James. He died 2 years ago of a heroin overdose, after getting addicted to our own painkillers following a construction accident." The bomb exploded across the dinner table. Patricia started crying. Garrett sat in stunned silence, and Kira felt like she was watching a family implode in real time. "James," Patricia sobbed. "The homeless boy you sponsored through that charity? He was our son. He was the son I gave up for adoption when I was 19 because I thought I was too young to be a father. I found him again 5 years ago, tried to build a relationship with him. And then I watched him die from addiction to drugs my company produced." Kira's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. Walter hadn't lied about losing his son. He'd just left out the part about being one of the most powerful men in America. "Where have you been for the past 6 months?" she asked quietly. William looked at her with grateful recognition, as if thankful that someone in the room understood what he was about to say. "Living on the streets. Homeless. Trying to understand what I'd done to people like James, like the families Ms. Brooks works with every day." "That's impossible," Garrett said. "You've been in Europe. Geneva. You sent emails, had conference calls. I had my assistant handle everything remotely. I told everyone I was traveling, when really I was sleeping in shelters and eating at soup kitchens. Patricia stared at her husband like he'd lost his mind. You chose to be homeless. I chose to experience the consequences of my actions. Do you know what it's like to detox from heroin on the streets, Patricia? Because James did. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible, to have people step over you like you're garbage? Because thousands of families I helped create addicts experience that every day. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted had been living a completely different life than you thought? How did you handle the revelation? Let me know in the comments. William turned to Kira, his voice heavy with emotion. I've been trying to figure out how to make amends for what I've done. Today, when you sat with me, when you treated me like a human being instead of a problem to be avoided, it was the first genuine kindness I'd experienced in months. You lied to me, Kira said. About your name, your identity, everything. I lied about who I am now. But everything I told you about my guilt, about losing my son, about trying to understand the pain I've caused, that was all true. Garrett suddenly stood up from the table. This is insane. Dad, you're telling me that our entire fortune is built on drugs that kill people. Yes. And you've been living as a homeless person for 6 months? Yes. And we have a dead brother I never knew about? Yes. Garrett turned to Kira, his face stricken. Did you know about this? I met your father this afternoon. He told me he was a homeless veteran named Walter Johnson who used to work for a pharmaceutical company. And you didn't think to mention this when we got here? I was trying to process it myself. I had no idea Walter was your father until we walked into that study. Patricia wiped her eyes and looked at William with a mixture of love and horror. How could you keep this from us? James was our son too. I had a right to know him, to grieve him. I was trying to protect you from the truth about what I'd become, what our money was built on. So instead you let me live in ignorance while you played homeless man on the streets of Chicago? I wasn't playing, William said firmly. Those 6 months were the most real I've been in decades. Every night I spent in a shelter, every meal I got from a food pantry, every time someone looked through me like I didn't exist. That was my education in the consequences of corporate greed. Kira studied William's face, seeing the truth of his words. What did you learn? That the people affected by the opioid crisis aren't statistics or case studies. They're mothers and fathers and children who trusted doctors and pharmaceutical companies to help them, not destroy them. William's voice broke slightly. I learned that my son James was just one of millions of people who died because executives like me prioritized profit margins over human lives. And what are you planning to do with that knowledge? Kira asked. I don't know yet. I've been trying to figure that out. Well, figure it out fast, Garrett said bitterly. Because I don't know if I can marry someone whose family fortune is built on dead bodies. The words hit Kira like a slap. Excuse me. Kira, I love you, but this changes everything. If my father's company is responsible for the opioid crisis, if our money comes from drugs that destroyed the families you work with every day, how can we build a life together on that foundation? So you're blaming me for your father's choices? I'm saying this is complicated. No, it's not complicated. Kira stood up, her voice rising. Your father made terrible decisions that hurt people. That's on him, not on you, and certainly not on me. But the money. I never cared about your money, Garrett. I fell in love with you before I knew you had any. But apparently, you think so little of me that you believe I'd stay with you just for financial security. William cleared his throat. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. Don't you dare, Kira said sharply. You've been lying to everyone for months. You don't get to disappear when the conversation gets uncomfortable. William sat back down, chastened. Kira, Garrett said desperately. I didn't mean it like that. I know you're not with me for money. But how do we reconcile your work helping addiction victims with the fact that my family caused that addiction? The same way we reconcile any moral complexity in a relationship. with honesty, communication, and a commitment to doing better. Patricia looked around the table at her fractured family. So what happens now? Do we pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go back to our separate lives? No, William said firmly. No more lies. I'm done hiding from what I've done. What does that mean exactly? Kira asked. William was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at her. It means I want to hire you. What? Your organization, your expertise, your passion for helping families affected by addiction. I want to fund it. Properly fund it, not just token donations for tax breaks. With blood money. With money that's going to be spent anyway. The question is whether it gets spent on more corporate bonuses or on actually helping the people we hurt. Kira felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. How much are we talking about? To start, $50 million. Enough to fund treatment centers, family support programs, legal advocacy, whatever you think would make the biggest difference. The number took her breath away. $50 million could transform her work, could help thousands of families, could save lives. And what do you get out of it? The chance to do something right for once. The chance to honor James's memory by helping people like him. Or the chance to buy yourself a clear conscience. Maybe both. Would that make the help less valuable to the families who receive it? Kira looked around the table, at Patricia still crying over the son she'd never known, at Garrett struggling to reconcile his love for her with his family's dark legacy, at William, the broken billionaire who'd spent 6 months living as the people his company had destroyed. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. And I need complete transparency. Financial records, internal documents, everything. If I'm going to help you spend this money ethically, I need to understand exactly how it was made. You'll have full access. And no strings attached. I won't be your PR consultant or your image rehabilitation specialist. If I take this money, it's because I believe it can help people, not because I want to make you feel better about yourself. Understood. Garrett reached for her hand. Kira, what does this mean for us? She looked at the man she'd planned to marry, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the middle-class finance worker he'd pretended to be, but as the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune built on addiction and death. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I need to figure out if I can love someone whose inheritance comes from the suffering of the families I try to help every day. But you said the money doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter to me personally. But the source of the money, the ethics of how it was made, the responsibility that comes with it, that all matters very much. William leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, may I suggest something? What? Come with me tomorrow. Let me show you what I learned during my 6 months on the streets. Meet some of the people affected by opioid addiction, hear their stories, see what they need. Then decide if you can find a way to turn blood money into healing money. Kira looked at him for a long moment, seeing both Walter and William in his face. On one condition. Name it. We do it honestly this time. No fake names, no manufactured identities, no lies about who we are or what we're doing there. William smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. Deal. As the dinner party broke up and Garrett drove her home in tense silence, Kira stared out the window at the city lights and wondered how her life had become so complicated in the span of a single day. This morning, she'd been a social worker engaged to a finance worker, looking forward to meeting his middle-class family. Tonight, she was a social worker engaged to a pharmaceutical heir, being offered $50 million in blood money by a billionaire who'd been living as a homeless veteran. The question was, what was she going to do about it? And could she find a way to turn a family's legacy of harm into a force for healing? Tomorrow she was going to find out. The next morning, Kira stood outside the Meridian Pharmaceuticals building at 7 a.m., watching William Harrison approach on foot. He was dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, expensive clothes, but not the obvious wealth he'd displayed at dinner. More importantly, there was no chauffeur, no security detail, no entourage of assistants. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I almost didn't. What changed your mind?" Kira studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation she'd seen in so many wealthy donors over the years. Instead, she saw exhaustion and something that looked like hope. I kept thinking about what you said. About turning blood money into healing money. She met his eyes. And I kept thinking about all the families I could help with $50 million. Even if it comes from me? Especially because it comes from you. If someone who profited from the opioid crisis is willing to fund recovery efforts, maybe there's hope for actual systemic change. William nodded and started walking toward the subway entrance. We're not taking a car? The people I want you to meet don't trust men in expensive cars. They trust people who ride the L to get to work. 20 minutes later, they stood outside a recovery center on the south side, in a neighborhood that had been hit hard by the opioid epidemic. The building was clean but clearly underfunded. Peeling paint, windows that needed replacing, a sign that had seen better years. This is where I send families when their insurance runs out, Kira said. Which is most of them, because addiction treatment isn't profitable enough for companies to cover it properly. William stared at the building with something like recognition. How many people does it serve? About 200 active clients, with a waiting list of over 500. They could triple their capacity if they had funding. Inside, the center buzzed with activity. Group therapy sessions, individual counseling, job training programs, childcare for parents in treatment. All of it operating on a shoestring budget with staff who clearly cared more about their mission than their paychecks. Kira, a woman in her 30s, approached them, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. I didn't expect to see you today. Hi, Monica. This is William Harrison. He's interested in learning about addiction recovery programs. Monica's expression grew cautious. Are you a reporter? No, William said quietly. I'm someone who needs to understand the damage that pharmaceutical companies have done to communities like this one. Something in his tone made Monica relax slightly. Well, you've come to the right place. We see that damage every day. As Monica led them through the facility, William listened intently to stories of families torn apart by addiction, of people who'd started with legitimate prescriptions for surgery or injury and ended up homeless and desperate for heroin when the pills became too expensive. The thing people don't understand, Monica explained, is that most of our clients aren't criminals or addicts who chose this life. They're people who trusted their doctors, who followed prescription instructions, who had no idea they were being set up for addiction by companies that knew exactly what their drugs would do. William stopped walking. What would you say to someone who worked for one of those companies? Monica's eyes hardened. I'd ask them how they sleep at night. And if they said they couldn't? If they said they were trying to find ways to make amends? I'd say amends start with accountability. You can't fix a problem if you won't admit you caused it. They continued the tour, visiting with clients who shared their stories with heartbreaking honesty. A construction worker who'd gotten hooked on painkillers after a back injury. A mother who'd lost custody of her children because she couldn't afford treatment. A veteran who'd been prescribed opioids for combat injuries and ended up living on the streets. Each story hit William like a physical blow, and Kira watched him struggle to maintain his composure. Are you okay? She asked quietly as they stepped outside for air. No, William said, his voice thick with emotion. I knew intellectually that Meridian's drugs were causing addiction, but hearing these specific stories, seeing these faces, it's different. Now imagine hearing hundreds of these stories. Thousands. That's what I deal with every day. William leaned against the building, looking older than his years. How do you stand it? Because sometimes we save people. Sometimes families get reunited. Sometimes someone gets clean and stays clean and builds a life worth living. Kira studied his face. But we could save a lot more people if we had better funding. $50 million better? That's a start. William pulled out his phone and made a call. Jennifer. It's William Harrison. I need you to transfer $50 million from my personal account to. He looked at Kira questioningly. The Harrison Family Foundation for Addiction Recovery, Kira said without hesitation. The Harrison Family Foundation for Addiction Recovery. Set it up as a charitable foundation with Ms. Kira Brooks as the director. Yes, today. I don't care what paperwork needs to be filed. He hung up and looked at Kira. It's done. Just like that. Just like that. The money was sitting in investment accounts anyway, growing bigger while people died. At least now it's working for something good. Have you ever seen someone make a decision that completely changed their life in a single moment? What motivated them to take such a dramatic step? Share your story in the comments. Before Kira could respond, her phone rang. Garrett's name appeared on the screen. I should take this, she said, stepping away. Kira, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all morning. I'm with your father, learning about addiction recovery programs. Learning about them or planning to take his money. The accusation in Garrett's tone made Kira's chest tight. Both, actually. Kira, please think about this carefully. Once you take money from my family, you become complicit in everything we've done. Or I become part of the solution. What if people find out? What if the media discovers that addiction recovery programs are being funded by the same company that caused the addiction in the first place? Then we'll deal with it honestly. Garrett, your father just donated $50 million to help people affected by opioid addiction. That's more money than most recovery programs see in their entire existence. And what about us? What about our relationship? Kira looked through the window at William, who was sitting with a group of clients, listening intently to their stories. I don't know, she said quietly. I'm trying to figure out if the man I fell in love with is someone who can handle the complexity of this situation, or someone who just wants to pretend it doesn't exist. That's not fair, isn't it? Last night you were ready to break up with me because your family money came from questionable sources. Today you're angry because I'm trying to use that money to help people. What do you actually want, Garrett? There was a long pause. I want things to go back to the way they were before. They can't. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd want them to. What does that mean? It means I'm not the same person I was yesterday. Learning about your family's role in the opioid crisis, seeing your father try to make amends, being offered the resources to actually help people on a massive scale, it's changed me. Changed you how? I understand now what real power looks like. Not just the power to help individual families, but the power to change systems, to fund research, to create programs that could prevent addiction in the first place. So you're choosing the money over me? I'm choosing the work over everything else, including you, if necessary. Another long pause. Kira, I love you. But I don't know if I can be with someone who's willing to take blood money, even for good causes. And I don't know if I can be with someone who would rather maintain moral purity than actually help people. So where does that leave us? Kira watched William through the window, saw him exchange phone numbers with one of the clients, saw him wipe tears from his eyes as he listened to another story. It leaves us with a choice, she said finally. We can figure out how to navigate this together, or we can let it tear us apart. What would navigating it together look like? It would look like you taking responsibility for your family's legacy instead of running from it. It would look like you helping me figure out how to use your inheritance ethically. It would look like you becoming part of the solution instead of just feeling guilty about the problem. And if I can't do that, then we probably aren't as compatible as we thought we were. When Kira hung up the phone and went back inside, she found William in deep conversation with Monica about funding expansion plans. The waiting list is our biggest problem, Monica was saying. We have to turn away 3 people for everyone we can help. What would it take to eliminate the waiting list entirely? William asked. Honestly, about $10 million a year. New facility, more staff, better equipment, expanded programming. Consider it done. Monica stared at him. Sir, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not being sentimental. I'm being practical. William pulled out a business card. I'm the CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals. My company helped create the opioid crisis that destroyed these people's lives. The least I can do is fund their recovery. The silence in the room was deafening. Monica looked like she'd been slapped. You're William Harrison. From Meridian. Yes. The company that made the pills that got my brother addicted? Probably yes. Monica stared at him for a long moment, then surprised everyone by extending her hand. Then you better make this right. I'm trying to. Trying isn't enough. You need to succeed. William shook her hand. You're right. We need to succeed. 3 hours later, Kira and William sat in a small coffee shop, both emotionally drained from the morning's revelations. So what happens now? William asked. Now we get to work. $50 million is a good start, but it's not enough to address the scope of the problem. What would be enough? Honestly, probably $1 billion, spread across treatment, prevention, research, and legal advocacy. William didn't even blink. Then let's raise $1 billion. William, that's not. I know other pharmaceutical executives. I know investors, philanthropists, people who profited from the opioid crisis either directly or indirectly. It's time for all of us to pay for what we've done. Kira studied his face. You're serious. Dead serious. I can't bring back my son James, but I can honor his memory by saving other people's children. And your family? What about Patricia and Garrett? William's expression grew sad. Patricia will come around eventually. She's a good person who was kept in the dark about ugly truths. As for Garrett, he shrugged. He'll have to decide what kind of man he wants to be. As if summoned by their conversation, Garrett appeared in the coffee shop doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled and his clothes wrinkled from the night before. I've been looking everywhere for you, he said, sliding into the booth beside Kira. We've been working, Kira said simply. I know. I heard about the $50 million. It's all over the financial news. William raised an eyebrow. Already? Charitable donations of that size get noticed, Dad. Especially when they come from pharmaceutical executives. Good. Maybe it will inspire other executives to follow suit. Garrett looked back and forth between his father and his fiancé. So you're really doing this? Both of you? Yes, they said simultaneously. And where does that leave me? William leaned forward. That depends, son. Are you going to be part of the solution, or are you going to keep hiding from the problem? I don't know how to be part of the solution. I'm not a social worker or a recovery specialist. I work in finance. Then use your financial expertise to help us, Kira said. Help us figure out how to structure these donations for maximum impact. Help us create sustainable funding models. Help us turn guilt money into healing money. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. What about our relationship? What about us? What about us? Can we build a marriage on this foundation? You dedicating your life to fixing problems my family created. Garrett, I was already dedicating my life to helping families affected by addiction. The only thing that's changed is that now I have the resources to help them more effectively. And you can live with taking money from the people who caused the problem in the first place? I can live with using money from the people who caused the problem to actually solve it. What I can't live with is letting perfect moral purity prevent me from helping real people with real problems. Garrett looked at his father. Dad, do you really think this will make up for what Meridian did? No, William said honestly. Nothing will make up for the deaths we caused. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to prevent future deaths. And you're okay with potentially being seen as villains trying to buy redemption? I'd rather be seen as a villain trying to buy redemption than a villain who does nothing at all. Garrett took a deep breath and reached for Kira's hand. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, I'm in. I don't completely understand it, and I'm scared about what it means for our future, but I'm in. Kira felt tears well up in her eyes. Are you sure? I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that I want to be the kind of person who helps solve problems instead of just feeling guilty about them. And I'm sure that if my family's money is going to exist in the world, it should be used to help people rather than just accumulate more wealth. William smiled at his son. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet. Ask me again in a year when we see if I can actually handle this. What do you think it takes for someone to truly change from being part of a problem to being part of the solution? Is redemption possible for people who've caused serious harm? Share your thoughts below. 1 year later, Kira stood on the stage of the Chicago Convention Center, looking out at an audience of addiction recovery specialists, families affected by opioid addiction, and pharmaceutical executives who had pledged to follow William Harrison's example. The Harrison Family Foundation has now funded the opening of 50 new treatment centers across the Midwest, she announced to thunderous applause. We've provided scholarships for 200 people to become addiction counselors, and we've funded research that's led to 3 new non-addictive pain management drugs. In the front row, William sat beside Patricia, who had become one of the foundation's most effective advocates after learning the full truth about her stepson James. Next to them, Garrett beamed with pride at his wife of 6 months. But the most important thing we've learned this year, Kira continued, is that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about using the lessons of the past to build a better future. After her speech, as the conference attendees mingled and networked, Kira found herself standing with William on the convention center's outdoor terrace, looking out over the city where their unlikely partnership had begun. Any regrets? William asked. About taking your money? Never. About marrying your son despite everything? Never. Kira smiled. About trusting a homeless veteran named Walter Johnson who turned out to be a billionaire pharmaceutical CEO? Sometimes. I'm sorry I lied to you about my identity. I'm not. If you'd introduced yourself as William Harrison, CEO of Meridian, I never would have talked to you. I certainly never would have shared lunch with you. And we never would have built this. William gestured toward the conference center, where hundreds of people were working together to address the opioid crisis. Do you think it's enough? What we've done this year? It's a start. A good start. William looked thoughtful. I can't bring back the people who died because of Meridian's drugs, including my son. But maybe we can prevent other families from going through what James went through. That's all any of us can do. Try to leave the world a little better than we found it. Garrett appeared beside them, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking happier than Kira had ever seen him. The Peterson family wants to thank you personally, he told Kira. Their son just celebrated 6 months clean, and he credits the program you funded with saving his life. Kira felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing her work had made a real difference. That's why we do this. No, Garrett said, kissing her temple. That's why you do this. The rest of us are just lucky enough to help. As the sun set over Chicago, casting golden light across the city where Walter and Kira had shared a sandwich that changed both their lives, the 3 of them stood together, a pharmaceutical billionaire seeking redemption, a social worker who'd turned guilt money into healing programs, and a man who'd learned that true wealth came from being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Sometimes the most unlikely partnerships created the most powerful change. Sometimes sharing lunch with a stranger could transform multiple lives. And sometimes redemption was possible, even for people who thought they were beyond forgiveness. The Harrison Family Foundation would go on to fund addiction recovery programs across the country, eventually raising the $1 billion that Kira had said would be necessary to address the crisis properly. Other pharmaceutical companies would follow suit, pressured by public opinion and inspired by the example of real accountability. But more importantly, thousands of families would get the help they needed to heal from addiction, to rebuild their lives, and to break the cycles of suffering that had defined their communities for too long. All because a social worker decided to share her lunch with a homeless stranger who turned out to be exactly the person she needed to meet. Some stories, Kira thought as she watched another family reunite in recovery, begin with the smallest acts of kindness and grow into movements that change the world. This was one of those stories. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.